Hi, we're here with Stephen Baumgartner. He is the founder of Blossom Growth Services.
Hi, Paula.
Hi, Stephen. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Please tell us about Blossom Growth Services.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Blossom Growth Services is an independent consulting entity that I recently created, basically designed to help early stage established organizations and private equity and VC firms assess and build and fix their sales and marketing capabilities, basically to make sure that they're growing profitably and taking advantage of market opportunity.
And how are you really creating value for these companies?
Well, I mean, you can always say that anytime someone's in there helping to add more sales or grow the top line, that's value. One of the tricks, though, is to make sure that as a consultant, and especially in my case, an execution-based consultant, you're giving them something that they can act on immediately. Okay. One of the reasons why I wanted to create Blossom, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you or not, but one of the reasons why I wanted to create Blossom was because I was frustrated with some of the traditional consulting approaches in which and believe me, I'm speaking as I used to be one of them for many different firms, is that they would come in with a very strong, high-level academic approach that are almost no-brainers, but they had trouble in many cases translating strategy into activities. And in today's, fast-paced market, not to get cliched, but in today's fast-paced market, sales leaders need to understand how they can get their people to execute differently tomorrow morning in order to increase the numbers.
Sure, that makes sense. And we'll talk about some of those, strategies that you use later.
Sure.
But what I would like to understand is kind of the differences in your work between a startup company who is in that growth period and an established company, or maybe a VC or private equity firm.
Sure. Well, they're three entirely different animals, as you can imagine, right? I will say that we'll just go through them quickly. The startup organization, and even in many cases the early stage growth, which that next phase up, are, I find, much more enjoyable to work with. Primarily because they're not all spun up in culture, they're not spun up in process. What they have is they've achieved their success through a good idea, hard work, and luck. And in order for them to get to the next phase, what they need to do is instill very basic fundamentals and sales-related discipline in order to take advantage of the opportunity. So I can't tell you how many times I'll have meetings with startups where they say, okay, I'm trying to figure out my revenue model. And I say, great, how many people have you sold to? How many conversations have you had? And they've said, I have had so many great conversations. I said, great, how many have you sold? Well, we haven't sold any yet. Okay, well, that for startups is the primary need that they have when it comes to sales consulting. They need someone who can sit down with them and help them prioritize and pick 3 people that they can call tomorrow morning and 3 things that they can act on, and leave the other pieces for the next day. So it's a prioritization piece. With the more established organizations, right, anywhere from, frankly, when I say more established, your blue chips, anything from 10 million and up to billions and billions, right? One of the challenges that you have with those is they are spun up in culture and in many cases over-engineered process. So they, in an effort to measure everything and hold everybody accountable, they've lost track in many cases of what the fundamentals of their business are. In which case, and many times it's, from a sales standpoint, calling the right people, saying the right things, and measuring the right results. And making sure that they are measuring and holding people accountable for things that those individuals can control. I did a project for a consulting firm one time, and the consulting firm, I spoke to the CSO, and they were going through a transition, but I spoke to the CSO and I said, let me look at your dashboard. And he showed me a dashboard of 25 different measurements. And 4 of those measurements were measurements that could be directly impacted by him or members of his sales team. Everything else was a calculation, which meant that he couldn't do anything differently, really, to change those numbers. Mm-hmm. They were always at the mercy of what the individual inputs were. So I said, while you're even looking at these, why don't you just simply focus your people on the 4 things that they can control? And that's what he did, and their numbers and their activities took off.
Wow.
So it's about helping those companies get back to their fundamentals. And then the third piece, the PE and the VC firms, those are more. I'll speak more. So the VCs are more like the startups in helping figure out the revenue model, but the PE firms are they need spot help. Very few organizations, very seldom is it that they say we want a total transformation in the way that we go to market or the way that our portfolio company goes to market. What they need is, in many cases, they've already placed new management, or they're comfortable with the existing management, or they have a CEO first model who's going to run the business, but they see little trouble spots with it, whether it be the way they manage their key accounts, the way that they manage the service relationship after the sale, even the way perhaps that they manage the inventory management at the tail end, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that we work, that I like to work with PE firms, is we'll go in and just spot help them on a little project by project basis, because they're not willing to, nor do they have the time, the patience, or the money to take on major transformations to fix everything that needs to get fixed immediately. So you just kind of chip away at it.
Sure. And Stephen, do you have an industry focus at all?
I don't have an industry focus right now. I certainly have, it's more of a model focus. My background and my skills really specialize in business to business sales. I started my career in marketing services before I got into sales, so I have an understanding of the marketing concepts and can certainly help facilitate between the pull of marketing and the push of direct sales. But for me, it's more of a business to business. Okay. And the reason being is because in a business to business model, you can control that channel. Mm-hmm. So no matter what happens with the numbers, there's always somebody that I can pick up the phone and call. Mm-hmm. In a B2C model, you're always at the mercy of what the general consumers, what their mood is. So I can market to them, but at the end of the day, I can't pick up the phone and start calling consumers and say, please go to my site, or please go to my store and please purchase more.
Sure.
So that's, there are some industries that I've spent more time than others in. I've spent a tremendous amount of time in media, digital technologies, obviously now, and then spent some work in insurance, financial services, and even manufacturing. Okay,
great. And what is one thing that you can really say has attributed to your success?
There's probably a couple of pivot points or trigger points in my career. The very first was, as I told you, I started in marketing services, and then I took a sales role for a business services company in the media industry, and I was a marketing guy. And so when I first stepped into my first sales role, all of a sudden I had targets, and all of a sudden I had these obligations and roles and responsibilities and goals, and that was a shock for me, because I had never been held so accountable. And I got all the way down the path to being fired, and I realized, and I was 22 years old, but I realized that at one point I said, you know what, nobody's going to help me through this. My sales manager, as much as I do agree or disagree with what he or she was doing, I knew that I was the only one that had to get through it. And so I looked in the mirror and said, what am I going to do differently to figure this out? And I think I've now carried that through. It's caused me to be very pragmatic, keeping in mind really what matters in business, and taking out all the noise and saying, and I've carried it all the way through when I actually had that sales management and sales director's job later, and built up the P&L, and then moved into consulting. And I bring that methodology to my clients to say, okay, wait a second. What is noise versus what do we really need to worry about, and what can we control and execute on tomorrow morning to get this thing headed in the right direction? The trick for many of these companies is that they have to understand that it is never going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. They have to be comfortable with 70-80% confidence, mitigate against the rest. Because no matter what they do, no matter what their strategy is, there will be a set of fundamentals that they need to be good at, no matter what, So let's just get started on those fundamentals.
Sure. What are those fundamentals?
That's a good question. From a sales standpoint, every company's fundamentals are going to be different. For me, and these are going to sound very academic, but for me, the fundamentals are making sure that we are selling to the customer in the way that they want to be sold to. If it's a consultative sale, if we're educating them while we're selling to them, then we need to have people and we need to have a process that supports that and then manage to that process. So it's about understanding the customers. It's about very clearly and very simply defining the roles and responsibilities and the behaviors that you want out of the salespeople. It is aligning that and then giving them the tools and the measurement to support it, which includes compensation. But it's about simplicity, trying to keep it as simple as possible and keep people focused.
Sure. Stephen, I have one last question for you.
Sure, I hope it's an easy one.
What is your vision for Blossom Growth Services?
Besides world dominance, my vision for Blossom Growth Services is to really help companies understand what those fundamentals are, and realize that there is consulting support out there from people who understand how to execute. And that it doesn't need to be perfect. And your strategy is always going to be evolving and always going to be changing. So if I can find people like me and who understand both the execution standpoint, they've been operators and consultants. They understand that it's not about how many PowerPoint slides you throw at somebody. It's about walking in, rolling in your sleeves, helping people make decisions, sitting next to them, helping them determine how to execute. And if I can keep busy doing that and I can find a team that want to help me and clients who are interested in that type of work, then I think we'll be very successful.
Great. Stephen, thank you so much for meeting with me.
My pleasure. Listen, I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And if you're interested in learning more and connecting with Stephen, go to fundology.com.